Good evening. I'm very glad to be here again. I need this. Okay, so thank you for that lovely introduction. I have been focused on sneakers now for quite a while, but I just want to give you a bit of a background on how the whole process started. If I can make this work. Is there a secret? Okay. Oh, it's not on. Okay, great. So I work at the Bata Shoe Museum, which is located in Toronto. It's a private museum that was started by Miss Sonia Bata, and we have over 13,000 artifacts. The oldest dates all the way back 1,500 years and is the ancient Egyptian, and the most recent is, well, a pair of sneakers. However, when I first started working there 15 years ago, you can see I was able to work with a lot of indigenous material. We have one of the largest moccasin collections in the world. We also have a very, very strong Western fashion collection. But the one thing that Mrs. Bata hadn't historically collected was, in fact, sneakers. Now, given the importance of sneakers within today's culture, I thought that probably the time is right to turn my attention to footwear. I had been working on the history of the high heel and its meanings in relation to constructions of idealized femininity for over a decade. And so when the opportunity presented itself to do a sneaker exhibition, I thought that this would be a very interesting time to look at constructions of idealized masculinity. So that has been sort of one of the lenses that I've approached this topic through. So when I started, as I start any project, one of the things I cannot stand in history is when I read somebody who says, this is the first time this was ever invented, and they haven't actually done their homework. So I always want to get to the origin story of any different type of footwear, and so I decided that I would do that with the sneaker. And I think that you'll see that a lot of our misconceptions, or a lot of what we think about sneakers, have some misconceptions. So the story of the sneaker actually goes all the way back to the jungles of Brazil. It wasn't until Europeans became interested in the sap of a tree, rubber, that the sneaker could even have been invented. This material, this latex, was a milky sap that comes out of the tree, and it's actually relatively elastic. And within Brazil, rubber had been used to make things like waterproof jackets. It had been used to make footwear. And so it had been used for a long time, but one of the challenges with rubber is that when you take it out of the tree, it very quickly coagulates and turns into a kind of useless mess if you don't immediately form it into something of use. And then by the time you ship it to some place like, say, France in the 18th century, it has become almost completely unusable. It was still somewhat bouncy. People began to use rubber. In fact, the reason why we have the word rubber is it was used to erase pencil marks. And so you can see that even that term, rubber, sort of suggested that people saw it as a curiosity, but they didn't see its potential. The first time that Europeans really, and Americans became interested in rubber, it actually caused a rubber craze, was through rubber footwear. This is a pair that we have in the collection. It's from about 1825, and it was made in the jungles of Brazil using indigenous tradition on semi-curing rubber. And what would happen is that they sent European-style lasts, which are shoe-shaped forms, and they would dip it in this liquid latex and then semi-cure it over a fire. And they shipped it up to places like Boston. They shipped it to Europe. And everybody was amazed by this product. It was so stretchy. They could slip it on over their shoes. Their feet were now waterproof. Amazing. Lasted all springtime long, and then the summer came. And what happened in the summer was that the rubber melted because it had no ability to sustain the heat. And then when they put it in their attics for wintertime, the cold broke it. And so rubber, again, was interesting, but it created an actual rubber panic because people still could not find a way to make it stable. It wasn't until a gentleman named Goodyear figured out that if you add sulfur to boiling latex or rubber, you can actually cool it and it keeps its shape, it stays elastic, and it doesn't melt in the heat or crack in the cold. Now, all of a sudden, we had one of the most important materials that was going to drive the industrial age. So this rubber began to be, as one author has put it, the muscles and sinew of the industrial age. If you look, I'm going to move away from the mic. If you look at the belts that are running here, these are rubber. So you can see that rubber itself is beginning to create an emerging, very up-and-coming middle class. And they are very excited by their new financial position. So they make for themselves footwear that can show that they literally have time to play. These are the first sneaker consumers. The earliest sneaker, which I would argue is a rubber-soled shoe with a canvas high top, was invented to meet the needs of people who wanted to show that they had the privilege and time to play. So the early sneaker was, in fact, an item of luxury. We look back at early sneakers, such as this Beacon Falls pair, and we see something that seems very humble. But instead, what it signified was that the woman who might have worn these, the child who might have worn these, had the time to not have to work 24 hours a day, but had the time to do things like play lawn tennis, which was the sport of kings, and itself was something that the up-and-coming, the nouveau riche, really wanted to be seen playing. The other thing that I think is important, because it has importance later in the 20th century with sneakers, is that tennis whites, keeping your clothing and your footwear sparkling white, was also a signifier of privilege. You not only it meant that you weren't working all the time, you had extra shoes to wear, you had somebody to maybe take care of your shoes, but this really comes to play with the Air Force One later in the 80s. These similar types of issues of expression of status and how you use sneakers to express that has a very long history related all the way back to the 19th century. I also just want to point out this pair of Beacon Falls shoes, very rare pair, but Converse, who started Converse, actually started out working at Falls and learned the rubber trade through working there. Now, just to prove my point even more, that sneakers really were a way of expressing leisure, was that oftentimes the way that sneakers were constructed was meant to look like another form of upper-class men's leisure footwear, which was the spectator. So here you can see a gentleman, this is a Tissot painting, and you can see a gentleman lying back with these two ladies on his yacht, or enjoying someone's yacht, and you can see his spectator shoes, right there. That two-tone look, which would come in and out of fashion over the course of the 20th century, very much signaled that the wearer was there enjoying himself as a spectator or enjoying himself in some leisure time activity that didn't require work. And so you can see how early sneakers, this is a pair of Perfection sneakers, reflected this upper-class tradition of showing leisure time footwear. Now, another thing happens at this time. The same time that you have industrialists who are all of a sudden coming into money and wanting to show everybody that they have this newfound status through wearing sneakers and buying them, one of the things that I should point out was that early rubber shoe that I showed you was 5 times the cost of a leather shoe. When I say rubber item, I mean it was a luxury item. A rubber tree could only be tapped every other day, only get a cup of latex from it at a time. So the rarity of rubber is something we just don't think about today, but was very central to the beginning of the story of sneakers. So as the upper and middle classes are beginning to wear sneakers to basically show off, they also begin to be concerned about what were called the diseases of affluence. One of the things that the upper classes now had to do was they were no longer sort of taking care of their country estates. They might be sitting in an office or sitting in a boys' club, and all of a sudden, sitting was taking a toll on upper class and middle class health. But in addition to the concerns that these new industrialists had for their own health, they began to see that factories were employing hundreds and thousands of people who were coming to America and crowding into very tight urban quarters and themselves becoming riddled with disease. There was concern that there was moral contagion, that if you didn't deal with the situations that the workers that these upper class industrialists employed, you might yourself become somewhat tainted or disease would begin to spread. So exercise begins to be seen as an antidote to urban criminality. One of the things that happens is the YMCA is created. The YMCA, the Young Men's Christian Association, was invented so that men who were coming new to cities from the countryside would have a place where they could get a good dose of Bible teaching, and they could also exercise so that they could stay morally pure. This is why Central Park was created. Central Park was African housing that was raised to the ground to make room for fields and places where people could ice skate in the winter and walk in the summer. And it was someplace where the lower classes were something that they thought that this would help keep the lower classes from going to bars and gambling. And it would be a place where the upper class could play tennis and ride their coaches and show off, basically. And so this sort of tinge of exercise being related to morality is something that is very defining of sort of physical culture in the second half of the 19th century. In fact, exercise programs in prisons were instituted. You can see these are children who are in prison who are being forced to walk in a circle. Not very enjoyable, but the idea was that if you exercise their body, then their criminality might dissipate. And one of the most important sports in the history of sneaker culture, basketball, was invented out of these concerns. So basketball was invented by Naismith, who hailed from Ontario, Canada, and he was asked by the YMCA to create a sport that would basically curtail or help control men's natural aggression. One of the challenges with sporting is that oftentimes the big sports, football and baseball, require huge amounts of land in order to play. So he was to devise a game that could be played indoors during the winter to help beat off cabin fever, and that in the springtime and summer could be played in smaller urban environments. So he created the game of basketball in 1891. Basketball, because it was a sport that could be played in urban environments, became dominated by urban people. A lot of the Lower East Side Jews played a lot of basketball. This is the a Harlem basketball team from a fraternity. Basketball began to define sport. It was something that was available, accessible, because of the simple size that the game of space that the game required. The other thing that happens almost immediately is that because of that 19th century upper class pressure to express themselves through the status of fashion play, you begin to have the creation of multiple types of sneakers. You have sneakers for running, you have sneakers for basketball, you have sneakers for tennis, and by the turn of the century, you begin to have finally basketball shoes, specially made basketball shoes. This is the original Converse All-Star from 1917, and it is in the exhibition if you get a chance to see it. It's fantastic. It's so rare. And it, of course, goes on to, well, I think in part define basketball shoes for the next couple of decades. One of the things that happens as you turn into the 20th century is that these ideas of status expression, increasing interest in a diverse type of sports, ideas about getting the lower classes involved in sports. I have to add that sports are also added to school curriculums, is one of the ways in which sneakers start to become, quote unquote, democratized. Sneaker production becomes increasingly possible through innovative techniques. You also have, unfortunately, a lot of rubber trees which are sneaked out of Brazil and put into places within the British Empire that they had holdings in tropical places, and slavery and rubber production becomes rampant. If you think about Leopold's Ghost and the Congo, one of the reasons why the Congo was such a brutal place was because of the high price of rubber. But all of these situations is bringing more and more and more rubber into American markets, and it is helping to lower the cost of sneakers. The other thing that happens is World War I. World War I is the first World War, and what it does is it devastates bodies in ways nobody could have predicted. The invention of the machine gun, I believe. You have all kinds of nerve gas. You have all of these absolutely physically devastating types of war machines that kill bodies, maim bodies, but you also have medical science that allows bodies like this to survive. bodies like this come home, and people begin to look at them, and they become concerned about the state of the fitness of their citizens. One of the things that was one of the most shocking things about World War I was that of something like 10 men who signed up for World War I or were called to participate in World War I, 9 of them were considered unfit. So the health of populations was at a dismal low. And when people saw this, especially given that the tensions of World War I had not been completely resolved, that sent many cultures into a bit of a tizzy about the health and fitness of their citizenry. So physical culture, the pursuit of the physically ideal body, starts to grab the attention of people worldwide. This is also fueled by Hollywood, when you have suntanned and glistening godlike bodies that become associated with the cultural ideals of both masculinity and femininity. In women's fashion, sneakers begin to become a little more important, in part because women are got the right to vote, they're going to university, they're also starting to show their bodies in ways that the female body had never been seen before. Skirts are up to the knees, shoulders and arms are bare, and all of a sudden, all of the devices that women had had access to, like corsets and hiding their legs under skirts to present the idealized figure, were gone. They had to do things like strengthen their stomach muscles to use that as their corset, and they had to diet because all of a sudden the most ideal female body was very, very lithe. And so they begin to turn to sports as a form of weight management. And there is a great deal of concern at this time that as women are stepping into what had previously been considered men's privilege, playing sports is one of them, they are offered the opportunity to play these games, such as tennis, as long as they wear things like high-heeled sneakers. So this is a pair of 1920 shoes that sort of has menswear influence, but it also has high heels. And I would argue that you still see shoes like that today. I think the complexities between idealized femininity and athleticism remain unresolved, and I will get to those in a while. The other thing that happens, particularly after the Great Depression hits in 29, is Hollywood becomes a place where people can escape. They begin to see a lot of endorsements. Celebrity endorsements becomes a thing that sort of ad men turn to. And Chuck Taylor gets his name on a shoe. He's the first celebrity endorser. This is Chuck Taylor. I think most people have never seen Chuck Taylor before. He was a basketball coach, and it's interesting because recently they asked a group of fourth graders if they knew who Michael Jordan was, and they did not. But they knew what Air Jordans were. And so I think it's interesting that in the 30s, people would have known who Chuck Taylor is, but we now just know what Chucks are. So Chuck Taylor gets called into work at Converse. He actually gets hired in 1924, and he becomes very concerned about the soles of the shoes that Converse designs for basketball. And when his name is added, he becomes very concerned about the soles of the Converse shoes. And here's a sweatshirt that he's wearing with a sole that he's designed, like someone stepped on him. It's a great image. So as I was saying, if the 1920s sort of brought a focus onto this godlike suntanned body, the 1930s politicized it. If you think about what's happening in the 1930s, the rise of fascism is, and in relation to that, nationalism begins to define the political landscape. One of the things that's happening in Germany is this idea of Aryan superiority. And so there's a great deal of science that is done measuring the differences between people, who is naturally superior to another person, what races are more naturally superior to others. And of course, as we know, in Nazi Germany, they begin to think of the Aryan race as naturally superior. And so they begin to encourage their citizens to exercise in service of the state. So the whole point of exercising at this time isn't to look like a Hollywood actress, but instead to look like a good German. And it's not just Germany that does this. Oh, did I turn? Everybody starts to do it. This is Italy, that's Germany, they did it in Japan, they even did it in the United States, and on the feet, every single one of these is a pair of sneakers. What I find interesting about this is that sneakers are fully democratized because of fascist ideas about fitness. So now that everybody is expected to exercise, everybody starts to have a pair of sneakers in their closet. Sneakers and relations to preparing yourself for war also played out in sneaker ads. This one, in Keeping America Fit, there was a great push by the American government to make sure that we were all ready for what was going to happen next. And then even the naming of sneakers. This is a Ked's Gladiator. So you begin to have sneakers that are named in wartime terms, all about creating the next generation of soldiers. One of the most important events in the pre-war period was the quote-unquote Nazi Olympics in Berlin in 1936. Hitler saw this as an opportunity to really prove to the world that Aryans were, in fact, physically superior. Unfortunately for Hitler, Jesse Owens became the winningest Olympian of all time. He was an American, and he came over, and one of the things that also is amazing that happened is that two brothers, Adi Dassler and Rudi Dassler, were making running spikes. They had already had their shoes on Olympians at earlier Olympics, and Adi in particular wanted to make sure that he had his family's shoes on Olympians who might win. And so he offered this pair, to Jesse Owens to wear at the Olympics. Now, there's a misunderstanding. He never did actually compete in the Adidas shoe, or they weren't Adidas yet, in the shoes, but he did try them on during trial and did run in them a number of times. But eventually, this Adi Dassler went on to, after World War II, to create Adidas. And his brother, whom he then fell out with after the war, Rudi, created Puma. So it was a very important moment in the history of sneaker culture. So during the actual war, sneakers, as I said, were inexpensive, mass-produced, and many armies tried to make sneaker boots that their soldiers could train in or actually even fight in. One of the things that frustrated this was that the Japanese had taken over most of the rubber-producing areas of the world, and so rubber availability dropped precipitously, but most Japanese soldiers actually wore sneakers into battle, particularly in the South Asian arena. Americans attempted to make military footwear, sneaker military footwear. This is a Garrison that we have in the collection, but they fell apart very quickly. However, they did allow for the invention of the jungle boot. And this is a 1944 ad from Keds that talks about how Keds were part of the invention of the jungle boot. We know that the war did not last. It finally ended, and when it ended, it brought with it a whole host of things. And one of them was a sort of reorientation of what it meant to be male and what it meant to be female. This famous picture that was in Life magazine shows a returning sailor kissing a nurse who's wearing rubber-soled shoes. But pretty soon, women who had held jobs were now being expected to go back home, and the inevitable happened, which was this. The baby boom in the post-war era really was exactly that, a huge baby boom. And all of a sudden, sneakers, one of the cheapest forms of footwear now available, were what all kids ran around in, particularly boys. And the sneakers that they wore came to be signifiers of childhood, boyhood, really connected to ideas of youth. So companies like Converse, this is the Converse Gripper, there's lots and lots of versions. You got PF Flyers, you got Randy's. The youth market just explodes with teenagers as these young baby boomers become teenagers, and sneakers, you can see Skippies, Keds, all being worn. And while this is great and is helping to define a new kind of market, the teenage market, the youth market, it is doing nothing for the status of sneakers. If you want to understand how far sneakers fell as a signifier of status, all you have to do is look at the post-war period. It really gets bad in the 60s when sneakers are worn to tatters and they become almost a part of anti-fashion. Slowly, Americans are continuing to make this canvas, high-top, rubber-soled sneaker, but it's the Europeans that are remarkably changing the game. Adidas begins to make shoes that look like this. This does not look like a PF Flyer. This does not look like a Converse All-Star. This looks like a rocket ship. I mean, it is very streamlined. Think of it in its period. For 1960, which is when the record came out, it is sleek, it's colorful, it's eye-catching. It's also sold just to professional or elite level athletes. So all of a sudden, you begin to have a high-priced item coming into fashion, well, coming onto the scene, and it will eventually make it into fashion. By the time the baby boomers go through their hippie movement, they come out the other end and they are actually completely self-focused. The me generation focuses on exactly what the me generation means, me. It was all about physical perfection, doing personal best, and so all of a sudden, exercise, which just in the pre-war period had been all about, I'm going to exercise and perfect myself for my race, for my country, none of that matters anymore. Now I'm going to perfect myself for the dating scene, for the disco. I'm going to perfect myself for myself. And so competitive games begin to take off. The Boston Marathon, which had been run since the 19th century, all of a sudden surges in popularity. You begin to have people joining health clubs, which are extremely expensive. You begin to have people who want to flaunt their newfound wealth and their ability to show that exercise matters to them. And this is the perfect market for the elite sneaker at a high cost. So Adidas is meeting that market, but so is Nike. Nike comes into the game, well, they start, Blue Ribbon Sports, they start selling Onitsuka Asics, or Onitsuka Tigers, eventually Asics. And they begin, Bill Bowerman, one of the co-founders who had been an elite runner himself and a running coach, begins to tinker with sneaker design. His most one of his most famous is the waffle trainer. I always make this connection because I think it's pretty funny. Goodyear, you remember Goodyear? He was so obsessed with rubber that he actually started his experiments in debtor's prison in 1834 with raw rubber and his wife's rolling pin. Move ahead 100 years, and you have, actually 150 years, and you have Bill Bowerman working with liquid rubber and his wife's waffle maker. And what he does is he pours rubber into his wife's waffle maker, pushes it down, and is able to extrude almost all the excess rubber, leaving a very high tread that is exceptionally thin and lightweight. He then brilliantly has it coupled with a bright-colored nylon upper. And all of a sudden, he has an expensive, eye-catching, elite athlete-level pair of running shoes. But these shoes segue very easily from the fitness club to the disco. And they begin to enter fashion. Here's Farrah Fawcett wearing the Senorita Cortez, and I don't know what she's wearing, actually. Does anyone know? No, she's got the Cortez on. This is, I can't remember even. I can't tell what she's wearing. I have really looked at that picture, and I can't figure it out. Okay, so but the idea of branded sneakers in eye-catching colors become not only a part of the pursuit of fitness, but also the pursuit of fashion. You also have multiple other things happening within what will eventually merge as one giant sneaker culture, and that's the invention of skateboarding and its adoption on the California coast. This is the Zephyr Boys from '72, and they are all, I think, pretty much wearing Vans. So Vans comes into the niche market, makes a very specific skateboarding shoe. But I would argue the most important thing to emerging sneaker culture is televised sports. What happens with televised sports is that all of a sudden, everybody has a TV in their living room. Basketball starts to get broadcast. But the most amazing basketball players are those who come from inner city courts. They have played street ball, and they have moves that are acrobatic, they're aggressive, they're entertaining. And this becomes the new crop of superstars. And the European companies see this and start to give them sneaker deals. So you have Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who gets a sneaker deal in '71. You have Walt Frazier, who gets the Clyde in '72. And these guys become not only icons of the game, but they also become inner city icons, and their shoes become important to street fashion, to urban identity. B-boying, which also starts in the 70s, needs a shoe, like a basketball shoe, that can stay on the foot. One of the important things that I should mention is that this signature shoe, really it's the All-Star that gets it first, but this from 71 is a low top. The other thing that's different from like the traditional canvas high tops that you have from Converse is that they're canvas and they're high tops. Europeans come into the game and they offer low tops that are leather, and they play with that idea of color. And then they add the signature, and all of a sudden you have a very desirable object. B-boying, which starts, also makes use of the low top basketball shoe. It's perfect for b-balling. And in 1983, you have flash dance. And flash dance brings this art form to a much broader audience. Rap, too, had made it to the top of the music charts with Sugar Hill Gang in 79, 80. And so you begin to have these inner city styles being broadcast to larger audiences. And in that way, they begin to popularize to a broader audience some urban fashion. There are some diehards who reject anything to do with new and cutting-edge sneakers, particularly musicians such as the Ramones, later with Kurt Cobain, and grunge. They stay to that idea almost of nostalgic playground wear, and they begin to have these ideas of their footwear choices being very anti-fashion. And you can still see this play out. This is one of the reasons why black Chuck high tops are so important within punk, because they function almost like a Doc Marten. For many people, the start of sneaker culture, however, is when Michael Jordan signs with Nike in 1984. His shoes go on to create an incredible sensation. You know, the story is that he came out wearing shoes that were not exactly to NBA standards, and so the Nonconformity Act is what he is accused of breaking, and he begins being fined. Now, Nike pays these fines, and so Nike begins to pay these fines, but really, truly, at $5,000 a pop, you couldn't buy better advertising, right? And so here you have a young athlete, superbly athletic, but also slightly breaking the rules. I mean, he's a hard worker, he's a good kid, but he's also got this little bit of bravado to him, and that helps to create a stir among Air Jordans. In fact, I was reading, all of the research that I do is primary research, so I'm reading through all of the original newspaper stories, and I was reading just before the Air Jordan came out, Nike was having a dismal time, and the head of Nike said, "I really hope the Air Jordans can turn us around." And wow, did they ever. So this is the Air Jordan 1 from the Nike archives. So this is the original. It's also in the exhibition. And it is a beautiful, priceless, yeah, I know, getting these loans was something else. It is a shoe that obviously started a revolution in many ways. However, all the credit can't possibly go to Air Jordan because you cannot ignore the Superstar. The Superstar, which I have the 1970 Superstar, not the French 1979, which I'm still desperate to get with red stripes if anyone has one. But the Superstar goes on to, in my mind, change everything. When I decided to do the exhibition, I was talking to a friend of mine. I came up with the idea of doing the exhibition, and the first people I called were Run DMC. They said yes. And so I knew that if they were going to participate, I could actually maybe pull this thing off. Their song, My Adidas, became such an important hit. And in ways similar to what Air Jordan did, Air Jordan is popularizing a new shoe. Run DMC is taking an inner city fashion and bringing it to the world. The way that Run DMC got their break with Adidas is not exactly the same as what happened with Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan was asked by Nike. Run DMC had to convince Adidas. And so what happened was that Russell Simmons their manager, had suggested that perhaps they just send a videotape to Adidas and say, hey, we want $1 million. We're like selling your shoes like hotcakes. So they sent off this video, which exists, and they had a concert at Madison Square Garden, and they invited a bunch of Adidas execs who came, and during the song My Adidas, Daryl said to the entire Madison Square audience, take off your Adidas and wave them in the air. And the entire Madison Square Garden audience was wearing a pair, and that's when the light bulb went off, that this was a market that Adidas already had a presence in, but they could actually capitalize on. And so here you can see that it's very clear how important the Superstar was to establishing urban fashion. Once you ended up, yeah, that's just at our desk at work. Once Adidas and Air Jordans, Adidas Superstars and Air Jordans come out, Converse tries to play catch up. They put out the Converse Weapon. You can see it's very eye-catching in color. Pony, a lot of niche sneaker makers come into the game. This Pony I actually got from Hong Kong. I love it because it looks like Hubba Bubba Bubblegum. But what I really think is important about it is that it's in My Little Pony colors. This actually is a very important point. And what's important about it is that men were not running around in clothing head to toe with these colors, but they were doing it at the shoe level. You will see that as sneaker culture increases, men take their greatest sartorial risks at their feet. And that what this does is it basically changes masculine attire. So it's happening in the 80s. Another thing that's happening in the 80s is the idea that science can change everything. You begin to have TV shows like $6 Million Man. You like his Adidas? And the idea that computer science can change your fitness level, so to capture people's, I know, because they're a prototype that I have in my collection. Direct from, I do not want to sell them. Okay, so the Puma computer shoe, the RS computer shoe, it's one of my favorite objects actually in the entire collection. This dream that computers could change the science of fitness found itself playing out in the footwear level. You had the Micro Pacer from Adidas, and here the Puma computer shoe is hilarious because it says that you need a Commodore 64. And what you did after your run is you plugged it in, and it told you how far you ran and how many calories you burned, which maybe you could have actually figured out yourself. But it's certainly, you wouldn't have the Nike Fuel Band, right, if you didn't have that.
Well, that's the precursor to the Nike Plus, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So another thing is happening in culture is that not only is the idea of science getting ready to changing ideas of how you become fit, science itself, computers, are changing ideas of idealized masculinity. The ideal male before this was kind of a suited businessman, a banker, say. He showed up wearing the exact same clothing as everybody in his office. All of a sudden, you end up with computer geniuses, and all of a sudden, computer tech guys are like this age. I mean, that's a joke. But you get the idea that the old guy is like, times are changing. Times were changing, and computer tech geeks showed up to work in playground clothing. This was the new signifier of success. This Mac and PC ad, which is more contemporary, illustrates it perfectly, right? This is the new way. This is the old way. So sneakers were starting to become a part of expressions of new types of masculinity. And this becomes even more important with the invention of Casual Friday. Casual Friday says to all office workers, on Friday, I want you to show up and show me a little bit about who you are in your private life. Oh no, that means that I can't show up in my three-piece suit and my business brogues? I gotta show up in something that's more casual? I gotta show up in something that reflects a little bit about my individuality? Sneakers are the perfect answer to that. There's so many different types of sneakers, so many different types of sports. And once this happens, the sneaker market explodes. However, I do want to just take a moment to talk about the Air Force One. This is the original Air Force One from '82. I got that in the exhibit. And so the Uptown, the all-white Uptown comes out in '86. The '82 came out in gray, did not do as well. But the Uptown came to define a type of Wild West masculinity that was glamorized in the 1980s. So this is, again, a more recent film, but I think that it's an apt comparison. One of the themes in the history of America is that American men go places and carve out successes for themselves. Maybe they do it in the Wild West and they become cowboys. Maybe they do it in inner cities and they pull themselves up by their sneaker straps. And so this idea, the romanticization of urban gangster culture, gets promoted in the media and it gets integrated into ideas related to sneaker culture. I said that the tennis whites that I showed you at the Beacon Falls would link back to this shoe because the Air Force One is supposed to be worn completely pristine. Some would wear it only once and every time would wear a fresh pair. Some would make sure that they tried to keep theirs as clean as possible. But the idea was completely related to these 19th century concepts of status. It brings it back, I think, in a very interesting way. It also raised huge amounts of very difficult controversy about who should and who should not, and who should regulate who should buy sneakers. Things like your sneakers or your life was part of a maelstrom of comments that were going back and forth in the media in 1990, basically blaming Michael Jordan and Nike for sneaker deaths. However, the people who were pundits sort of trying to blame Nike and Michael Jordan didn't seem compelled to talk about the Rolexes that had caused deaths or sports cars that had caused deaths. They made it a racially charged issue that really was not helpful. And they made it into a situation that I think continues to have ramifications today with sneaker consumption. So once, yes, which you are wearing tonight. So as Air Jordans become important, I think it's also interesting, and I've been toying with this idea, Air Jordans become so important to men's fashion that the majority of people who are buying them are not buying them to play basketball. They're buying them as part of their wardrobe. And in fact, I think it's interesting that Air Jordans come out on a season, the way fashion is released in a season. There's a kind of synergism there that I think hasn't been fully explored. But in addition to the Air Jordans coming out, Air Jordan 1, Air Jordan 2, Air Jordan 3, creating this anticipation for the next sneaker to drop, Nike, Adidas, all of the companies begin to sort of up the ante, and you begin to have extremely inventive types of shoes. Eric Avar did the Foamposite in '97. Then you begin to see that people get into high-end designers start to become interested in the game. This is Prada, one of the first high-end designers to offer a sneaker. You begin to have exclusive, the Nike Dunk Supreme. And of course, the Air Jordan, as I mentioned, remains incredibly important. Well, the reason why I single out the 11, not only because it's one of my favorite shoes, is because apparently when Michael Jordan saw it, he said, now there's a shoe that you can actually wear with a suit. And in fact, what ends up happening is that this sort of 1920s spat-inspired sneaker does go on to segue between the casual world and the high fashion world, and then begin to wear these shoes with their suits. The other thing that begins to happen is that as all of these things are coming together, Casual Friday, tech geniuses, superstar athletes, the glamorization of drug lords, you begin to have a new image of what it could possibly mean to look successful. Jay-Z, I think, does this very well. He is able to maintain both his credibility within Brooklyn, within the inner city, and yet at the same time can be on the cover of Vanity Fair. And very much this is a story of of how he is positioning himself. I mean, here you have the new chairman of the board from the streets of Brooklyn. to an American icon. And what I think is important about that is that this is changing the way male success looks. It's diversifying it. You have people like Kanye who begin to get involved with you're wearing some with actual sneaker design. One of the things that I think is important about talking about this is that this is a real divergence from how women consume fashion. Women in fashion consumption, you might have a superstar celebrity, but she becomes the face of a brand. Madonna is the face of Louis Vuitton. She doesn't participate in the designing of Louis Vuitton. So Kanye West is adding his 2 cents to the creation of these sneakers, and I think that this is one of the major different ways in which men are consuming fashion sneakers versus how women traditionally consume fashion. You also have other basketball players, not just Michael Jordan, setting trends. LeBron James. These are the Stewies. Do you know the Stewies? They are samples. Yep. Only 20 pairs made. I got it. 20. I got it. Christian Louboutin gets into the sneaker game. What I find so interesting about this is that Christian Louboutin is on every woman's lips. You say, I'm wearing my Christian Louboutins, and then all of a sudden men are willing to wear Christian Louboutins. Every rapper is now. And so when Christian gets into the game, he obviously, it's a very aggressive-looking sneaker. It's wildly eye-catching, but I find it interesting that he keeps that red sole, so you get to have that flash of red when you walk. You also have Jimmy Choo getting into the sneaker game, Jimmy Choo ready-to-wear. What I love about the Belgravia is that it's got a tapestry fabric, but do you see the naked ladies in the tapestry? So it's interesting because men historically have never borrowed from the female wardrobe. That is not a part of men's culture. That is not a part of men's fashion. And all of a sudden, guys are wearing Christian Louboutin and Jimmy Choo. And I think it's interesting that you have that naked silhouette just to reaffirm, potentially, the heterosexuality of the wearer. You have Jeremy Scott, Trinidad James. These were popular a couple years back, playing with high fashion issues. This sneaker was so controversial because of its appropriation, but it's interesting that cultural appropriation from inner city to mass production is not as sensitive an issue.
I like the teddy bear ones and the gorilla. They actually had the shackle one.
Yes, that got recalled quite quickly. So basically, where we are today is that uniform of authority, that uniform of sameness that men had historically for a century and a half at least been able to rely on to present themselves as successful men is being chipped away at. The benefit is that now you have so many different types of sneakers that you can craft an extremely individual sense, an expression of identity. Often these identities are brand linked, which itself is maybe another whole talk. But I think that as men step into the fashion system, they are really doing so at the sneaker level. And as I said, sneaker companies are stepping up to meet the challenge. You also have this sort of surge of retros. Retros play to our sense of nostalgia. The Stan Smith, which dates all the way back to the 70s, is now having a resurgence. That's actually one from the 70s. You also have, as people want to individualize their expressions of self, begin to look towards customizations. This is by Mosh. I thought it was hilarious that Tinker went as the Joker for Halloween this year. I was going to tweet him this picture. Can you see it's the Joker? Yeah. We also have artists who are turning to sneakers to make comments about commercialization, about brand identity. This is a prototype that Tom Sachs did. He did a Nike collaboration called Nike Craft. We have the Nike Crafts in the exhibition as well, but he gave me the prototype of a boot that didn't make it into production. And then you have shoes such as Kanye West Yeezy Boost that came out, 750, that just came out and created such desire. So today, some men collect obsessively. You have, what? Yeah. This is Rick Hasso's sneaker collection.
What are those?
It's all Air Jordans. Yeah, Yeah.
Who's that? Who is that right
This?
Yeah.
That's Clark.
Oh,
That's Clark Kent.
Clark Kent?
Yeah. And so Clark Kent has a huge collection, as many men do. But now the question is, where are the ladies? It's a highly political question. So sneaker culture really has transformed how men can participate in fashion, how men can construct ideas of self-identity, how men can ornament themselves, take greater risks at the footwear level. But what about women? Women have remained, I would argue, at the margins of sneaker culture. This is Missy Elliott, who does have a fabulous sneaker collection. One of the reasons for this is that some of the most desirable sneakers of all time are not made in women's sizes. So this is Zanotti. This is Zanotti Cootie. This is the men's version. This is the woman's version. Does this remind you of something I showed you from the 1920s? Right? The high heel sneaker. So the idea of femininity and sneakers, I think, is still something that we find challenging. Yeah, like Serena Williams, an amazing athlete, is not transforming sneaker culture. There are not men who are buying Serena Williams shoes. There are not even women who are buying Serena shoes. Instead, we get a feminized version of a very important shoe. And that feminized version relies still on the heel. So you end up having women who are sort of flirting with sneaker culture, but not fully allowed in because of the lack of shoes in their size. Sometimes stylists get away with it. The Air Max 90 comes in unisex sizes. But I think this suggests that times are going to change. I have argued in many times before that pornography is what lets you know what is going to be the next desirable thing. The high heel, for example, ornaments the naked female body in almost every pornographic image. Well, the high heel does it for a number of reasons. But now, increasingly, you are starting to see a lot of cheesecake with women wearing sneakers. I think that this could actually be a seismic shift. If this continues in pornography, more and more sneakers will be made available in women's sizes. And we will know, and women will be available to participate. What? Yes, but there are a lot of little women. Yeah, that's true. That's true. But it still means that they're not marketed to women, right?
I just read in the newspaper like literally 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
They start making a whole line just for women.
Yeah, but if it's just for women, is it going to be like what Vashti came out with, which was a lavender 11?
No, it's going to be the retro, exactly what they have for
Good.
women. For men, they're going to have for women.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. I'll have to update my talk. Other things that start to happen with sneakers is that there's been increasing concern about just the environmental impact of sneakers. What do you do when you're not a collector and you throw your sneaker away? Nike has been innovating things such as the Nike Flyknit, which makes it so that the whole upper is knit as opposed to cut out of a pattern. When you use a pattern, you end up with wastage, and so that creates waste. The Flyknit does not. The Ocean, that's in the exhibition as well. And they have the boots on the bottom. And so these are made completely with plastics that have been pulled from the ocean. So it's just still a prototype. The Parley for the Ocean Adidas. And I think another thing, I'm going to end my talk, is that sneakers are also leading the way by bringing an end, I would argue, to the Industrial Revolution. And why I say this is that before the invention of sneakers, at the start of the 19th century, I have water here, I just have to open it. At the start of the 19th century, when you wanted a pair of shoes, you went to your local shoemaker. And you said, hey, Joe, I want a pair of shoes. I want them to be orange with a 3-inch heel. And he says, well, I've got yellow, and I'll give you a 2-inch heel. And you're like, okay, well, give me this, give me that. You talk to your shoemaker, and then you go home, and he says, come back in 3 days. You know how long it takes to make your shoes. That's how shoemaking always was. Then the Industrial Revolution came along, and they said, you know what? You have to fit into a size, and you have to choose from what we pre-select. But sneakers are saying, hey, how about if you go onto the site and you customize? This is returning us back to how shoemaking used to be, and I find it interesting that sneakers are leading the way. So my exhibition that I did in Toronto was designed by Karen Rashid, and we had lots of different sneakers. So this is the exhibition that's traveling. So it's not coming unless you find a museum to take it.
Where exactly is this?
In Toronto. Well, no, this exhibition now is in a box and is traveling. So it just opened.
Will it ever come to in the area?
I don't.
When you say travel,
It's the closest. I think it opened at Brooklyn. It was at the Brooklyn Museum this summer. It's going to open at the High this summer, which is in Atlanta. So that's close. And so lots of people came to see it. And what I find interesting, and I said this earlier, is that I have never once done an exhibition in which the people who came to that exhibition spent so much time reading every single word I wrote, looking at every single sneaker I chose. I have never been more grateful for the sneaker audience. And I worked with 38 lenders for this exhibition, and each one was incredibly generous. I could not have done this exhibition without the advice of my sneaker guys, without the generosity of all of the archives that lent, all of the private lenders. And so this, hopefully you'll get a chance to see it. But if you don't, it is in the book. The end. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, I will definitely take questions. I have one already. Yes?
I never owned sneakers in my life, but my son is crazy about sneakers. So he told me a pair of sneakers
They're
with high heels.
5 red 5 high heels.
Oh, that's great. And so do you feel more comfortable wearing those?
They're very comfortable.
See?
I never wore before.
Yeah, well,
They're very comfortable.
times are
What's the
changing.
expedition called?
The exhibition, the original exhibition, and the title of the exhibition and the title of the book is Out of the Box, The Rise of Sneaker Culture. Brooklyn just took the Rise of Sneaker Culture. They dropped the first part. And
How long have you been doing this for? How long have you been into the sneaker? And
I started working fully on the exhibition in 2010.
It's crazy.
Okay.
Since the inner city kids and this and that was involved, did Adidas have 3 stripes? Why 3 stripes instead of 2?
Okay, the question about why does Adidas have 3 stripes? No. There are a lot of different theories about them. One is that Karhu, a Finnish company, had the 3 stripes and sold the concept to Adidas. Adidas argues that history is incorrect. Some people have said that it had allowed for the shoe to have a greater structural integrity because it adds basically it's like a corseting strip. But ultimately, it seems that it's an Adidas-derived trademark. And it just was part of that visual branding, the same way the Nike has the swoosh. It's a way of instantly identifying that you're wearing the brand Adidas.
Not 3 stripes and you're out.
Not 3 stripes, because that's 3 stripes.
Is it true that Nike got started by a gladiator running from the Olympics? Is that why the swoosh means victory?
No,
No,
No.
at all.
no. It was just a design student who came up with it. But it's after the goddess Nike, who means victory.
And Adidas were 2 brothers,
Adi and Adi and Rudy.
Adi.
Their last name was Dossler.
Now, what happened between the 2 brothers? One went
After
to
World-
Adidas and one went to...
Well, one founded Adidas and one founded Puma. Are there any other questions?
Why do you call them sneakers?
Why do you call them sneakers? Okay, this is a great story. Okay, so sneakers, the term sneaker dates all the way back to at least the 1870s. And when I said I would do primary research, so I'm looking for a mention of sneakers, and I found in 1870 a interview with a sandbagger in Chicago. Now, if you don't know what a sandbagger is, that is somebody who takes a bag of birdshot and hits somebody upside the head and robs them. So this interview was asking him, how do you become a sandbagger? I have no idea why they were doing this. And so the sandbagger says, well, you got to get your bag of birdshot, and then you have to get some sneakers because you can sneak up behind people before you hit them in the head. So I knew that the term, he didn't originate the term, but the idea of sneakers and sneaking around was something that was a part of the moment. So that same year, a sneaker store put an ad out that said, you don't have to wear, you don't have to wear, you don't have to be a sneak and wear sneakers. I'm saying it incorrectly. It's in the book, but it's almost the exact line from the Run DMC song. Wow. I'm not a sneak. I wear my sneakers, but I'm not a sneak. It was like the theme song from this ad from the 1870s. It was hilarious. Yeah.
Where was that? England?
No, Chicago. Yeah.
Okay, out of all the Jordans that has come out, which one is your favorite and why?
Okay, I really do have a soft spot for the 11. I constantly look at the 11. I know everyone loves the 3s. I like the 3s too. But I don't know why I have such a soft spot. I don't know if it's just because it's so clean. I like the shine. I'm like a crow. I like it shiny. I have no idea.
Okay, one more question.
Okay.
Out of all, it seems like you have a lot of, collection. Which one is your most, like precious,
Well, so because we don't collect sneakers, I don't have all these sneakers in my collection. These come from myriad collections. I have to say, I really wanted the original Converse the Converse All-Star from 1917. So that was a very important shoe for me to have. I really wanted, and I did not get, the original Superstar from '69. So I got one from 71. Yeah, still. And Adidas Archives does have them, yeah. But the problem is that once you hit the 80s, as you sneaker collectors know, those things fall apart.
Yeah.
So Bobito Garcia also gave me a pair of Bada Wilson John Woodens, which were only produced for 1 year, so those are extremely rare. But I also have to say the Puma computer shoe, I mean, it's just, I still have the original floppy disk, right? I mean, what more can I say?
What's the best way
Okay.
to preserve your sneakers?
Okay, the best way to preserve your sneakers, particularly those from the 80s, is literally putting them on ice.
Wait,
Yeah,
what?
is freezing them. That is the only thing that keeps them from degrading. So when you take them out, they will start again to fall apart, but the only way to, and in fact, the conservator at the museum did write a little piece on how to take care of your sneakers in the book. And so, but it is, the best thing to do is to put them in plastic bags. She tells you the whole thing, and put them in the freezer.
I have seen a sneaker collector. He actually puts his in a magnetic foil.
Yeah, I think what you need is to not have it have any oxygen, and you want to keep it out of the light. Yep.
Yeah,
Okay, wait, just a second. I'm sorry, what?
the sneaker game's on such a high.
It is, yeah.
And for you doing all this research, do you think that there's going to be a time that it's going to fall anytime soon? Maybe sometime in the future? There's always going to be, because I mean, Jordan Brand makes $1 billion a year. They make more than every other company put together.
You know, I think that once you guys have stepped out of your suits and out of your business brogues, there's so much to be gained from creating that expression of individuality. I think it would be hard to return to that herd mentality of dress. But I'm not going to say it's never going to go away. I've sort of been more on the fence with whether or not women will fully be allowed to participate in sneaker culture, or whether that's just sort of a flash in the fashion pan. So I don't know. I mean, sneakers, as you see, have been with us saying very important social things since at least the 1850s. Right. So they haven't gone anywhere in all that time.
The problem is sneakers are going up in price. They make them so limited.
Yeah, I know.
And the problem is, that's why you get all these shootings, because people want these exclusive shoes. My point of view is they should produce more, but then,
yeah, and I think,
produce more, nobody wants it.
That's what Kanye West is saying, too. A lot of guys are saying that. Yeah.
But it still sells out.
So if the value remains in its exclusivity, then you'll continue to have that issue. Okay. I'm done.
I just want to invite everybody down to Attic. On the second level, we'll continue the conversation and questions, have a glass of champagne and some sneaker cupcakes. And really, you've been a great audience. Elizabeth,
Thank you
thank
very
you so
much.
much.
Thank you. Yep. We do have the book for sale at the register. We do have a few copies left, and she will be signing to the left really quickly. So it is 45. Yep, 45.